In view of Cammie not being here yet, I now declare this meeting open. Let's see. Okay, would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dora, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Cardwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hall? Present. Commissioner Kemper?
Here.
Commissioner Sterling?
Here.
And Commissioner Kehoe?
Present.
All commissioners are present.
Okay. I'm going to call the rate hearing open now. Carol, you have a presentation to make?
Yes, I do. Good evening. Carol Bright, I'm the CFO. And so first I'd like to start, again, CRW's mission is we will provide high quality, safe drinking water to our customers at rates consistent with responsible planning for the long-term health of our district. And I'd also like to mention that the CRW Board of Commissioners, their top priority within the district is boundary protection. A little history on rate increases since 2002, so I'm going back 10 years. In 2007, the board approved equalization of rates between the north service area and the south service area. At this time, that was an increase for customers in the north, a decrease for the customers in the south, and it was a net revenue neutral. It did not bring in any additional revenue to the district. In 2008, the board approved a rate increase effective district-wide, and those are the rates that are still in effect today. At one of the rate committee meetings, the question was brought up about the West Lynn model. In the city of West Lynn, the city has a limit of 5% on all utility rate increases every year without going to the citizens to get approval for more. So at the maximum increase of 5% per year, the accumulation of that increase since 2002 would actually be a 63% increase. And our average customer with 16 CCF bi-monthly bill with a 63% increase since 2002 would today be paying $51.23.
What would they be paying now, Ms. Bright, with
$47.18.
with a simple 5% rate increase?
It wouldn't be simple.
It would be 5% every year, and they would be paying $51.23. The current rate without the rate increase, with only the 2008 rate increase, is $47.18.
So a 5% rate increase.
I went back to 2002.
A 5% rate increase on July 1st, 2012 would reflect how much to the ratepayer?
I didn't calculate that.
Thank you.
Well, in fact, 63% since 2002 or 2012. So really, it's considering that we are talking about a almost 80% increase in a 5-year time period. That is significantly more than the cumulative increase in a comparable time period at West Lynn. So I don't see where that number has any relevance.
I was just addressing a comment that was made during the rate committee that, you know, what if we have a system like that? So here is a slide showing our consumption and showing that there has been a downward trend in consumption within the district.
Do you have this?
I don't.
Do we have your presentation?
No, I didn't have a chance to get it printed out. I'll email it to you.
I think it's even more important for our audience than for us.
And then here is the effect on the revenue, and we calculated this revenue effect to be about 1.2 million. Had the consumption stayed the same, our revenue would be 1.2 million greater than it is now. So there have also been questions about expenditures. And basically the way we get in a position to spend any money at all, staff puts together a proposed budget. We have a budget committee that is made up of the board and 5 citizen members. The budget committee approves the budget, and the budget is adopted by the board. Every year, we've been within the budget appropriation in all categories, except for fiscal 2009, we exceeded the personal services budget by $50,000.
That may be accurate for general fund, I'm not sure it's accurate across the board.
So here's some expenditure trends. We're looking at salaries, the lower half, and then benefits and taxes on the top. And you can see that there have been some increases in salaries, but from 2005 through the end of 2008, there were some significant vacancies in the district, and those tended to be at the higher level. We had more than one of those years where there was no CFO or general manager, or had people in those positions for only a few months. And here's our personal services budget versus compared with actual. And as you can see, except for that 1 year, we have been below the budgeted dollars every year. And here's materials and services. Again, the materials and services has been below budget every year. You see kind of the big gap there in 2009. That was the first year that Lee Moore was here as the general manager. And basically when he got here, he wanted to kind of take a look around and see what was going on and really slow down expenditures. And that's why there was such a big gap between the budget and the actual. So here's a graph. I showed this with the rate committee on Monday, and this shows the darker red line shows what our actual revenues are compared with our expenditures. This is a combination of expenditures that we need the cash to pay this. It pays off our bonded debt, it's our materials and services, it's our personal services, as well as capital outlay. And then the blue line up at the top with the stars on it, that is where we believe the revenue would be had our consumption not changed. This graph is showing kind of our capital improvement projects, and because of the nature of the projects, you know, some years you have significantly more spending than others, but this also shows the sources of the money. In the early part of the graph, in 2007, 2008, we used to actually leave a balance in the CIP fund for use in the next year, and that practice changed. So now you can see that we transfer in 2011, and our estimate for this year, we transfer what we need for the projects that we're currently working on. And here's a graph that displays what's going on with our reserve balances. We've been using our savings for the CIP projects, and by the end of 2013, we will be nearly out of SDC funding for capital improvement projects. So what we're working on with the upcoming budget. And this isn't a budget committee meeting where you don't even have the proposed budget completed yet, but just to give you an idea, we're working with the managers to create a proposed budget for next fiscal year. We're striving to keep the overall cost flat based on where we think we're going to end this year, not based on the budgeted numbers. We do have some additional costs that we will have to incur next year based on mandates, and one of them is the cost of the corrosion control work that's being done with well 1. Another one is our debt service goes up just a little bit next year, and we have differences every year in the amount of principal that we pay. And the third one is we do have a union contract, and that does show pay increases of between 1% and 2%. As far as cost reductions, we're looking at everything that we can to try to keep our costs as flat as we possibly can, postponing some items until the following year. When we first put the budget together, our requirements exceeded our resources. And so we took a look at that. We reduced expenditures by about $420,000, and we changed the way that we were going to use our reserves. We do have a requirement in our bond covenants to keep our final payment, you know, kind of first and last month's rent. Our final payment on the bonds needs to stay as the ending balance. But that number is starting to build up a little bit because of rounding and interest earned. So we're going to send a little bit less there from the general fund. And the other item that we use to balance the budget is to send less than $500,000 to the capital reserve. That's really not prudent. It's not the best way to manage financially. And in fact, one of our goals with this rate increase and with everything we've been discussing is to increase the amount that we move to the capital reserve fund. So the initial pass-through, we were out of balance by $644,000. We reduced requirements by $425, made a couple of other changes, and the result is not as much in capital reserve for future projects. And now I would like to welcome Angie and Sarah, and they will begin their presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening. So in terms of this evening, we wanted to kind of touch back a little bit about where we've been up to this particular point. And since January of this year, we have been involved in updating the rates for CRW. And basically what that entails is a number of different analyses that are completed based on, financial records, based on fiscal policies, and based on a number of different customer characteristics and revenue projections that we have, as well as usage characteristics trends that we're seeing now into the future. And so we began our technical analysis in January, and a big piece of this rate update was making sure that we had rate committee involvement. And so we have actually had 3 rate committee meetings. First one is February 15th, second one March 7th, and then the third one Monday on March 19th, in order to present some of the results of the rate update to the committee, get input, clarification, ask questions, respond to questions, and also get some information and feedback in terms of the feeling of the community, in terms of where we are, what this process was all about, and some questions that came out of that particular process. And so just wanted to touch a little bit about where we've been in terms of this particular rate update, and then what was the involvement of the committee, and also we'll have some recommendations from the committee as well this evening. But what we wanted to share this evening is, well, really what was this rate study process all about? When we conduct a rate study update, really what are we looking for? And the 3 main brown areas there that you see is really what we're looking at in terms of establishing the rate study update. And that's first looking at financial goals and policies. Essentially that sets the foundation for creating a sustainable financial picture for CRW that forms the foundation for the rest of the analysis. We then go into the rate revenue requirement, and basically that's identifying what are the costs to serve of this particular entity, and what kind of revenue levels do we need in order to capture that. And so we look at things such as operating costs, capital costs, and debt funding requirements, again, as well as your fiscal policies. Once we've established a revenue requirement, we then look at, well, how do we collect this level of revenue from our customers in order to meet our financial obligations? So that, again, looks at how do we charge in terms of the fixed charge, and what do we charge in terms of the variable charge. And so that's really the big 3-step process that we're looking at: financial goals and policies, rate revenue requirements, and then finally rate structure.
How do you define operating costs?
Operating costs are based, I'm sorry.
You and
Sure.
George?
Sergey.
Sir, excuse me, sir.
No problem.
How is it that you defined operating?
So we're looking at operating costs in terms of salaries, benefits, supplies, all that you need in order to basically run the daily operations of the utility. And so that's kind of what we're looking at, operating and maintenance costs. We look at capital costs; those are more of the one-time infrastructure costs.
And those numbers will be detailed here?
They're actually in the appendix.
In the back.
So the actual numbers, yeah, we have a graphic in terms of the actual presentation body, but the numbers are in the back of the appendix.
Thank you.
So starting with the first level that we talked about, fiscal policies, what we looked at incorporating in terms of the rate study update was about 4 different fiscal policies, and these again are based on industry standards, but also modified to make sure that we're taking CRW characteristics and financial planning approaches and philosophies into consideration. So the first one we looked at is establishing an operating reserve, and that's essentially there to meet your daily operating kind of fluctuations, kind of like a checking account, as you would say, in terms of how we respond to that on a daily basis. And that we set about 90 days of operating and maintenance expenses. We have a contingency that's more of, again, our savings account to account for items such as emergency repairs, unanticipated capital and project cost overruns. That essentially, because it is tied so strongly to infrastructure potential needs, we look at original asset values in order to establish that. System replacement funding is more of an ongoing need, and that's the amount of funding for capital that is paid for at the ongoing rate. So as a customer of the system, when you pay your monthly bill, there's a certain portion of that bill that is going to pay for system reinvestment in terms of that portion of the system that is becoming worn out and obsolete and that we need to repair and replace. And so in that particular case, we looked at the annual depreciation expense, net of debt principal in order to establish that level. So we assumed, since we have debt, we want to make sure that we're capturing that. And then finally, debt service
Angie,
coverage.
Excuse me, the system replacement funding, how did you differentiate out between plant and operations? Because those are significantly different.
Right, so we actually look at your asset accounts, and so we're saying, what is the depreciation amount on your particular infrastructure asset on the system?
So you didn't split them out?
Yeah, they're split, so we don't include operations. So this particular place is strictly just looking at capital. For your infrastructure needs, what is that level of funding that we need in order to capture from our rates? So they actually are split.
So we have different depreciation schedules depending upon the type of capital
Right.
investment. Ductile iron at whatever it is, 50
Sure.
years, et cetera. So did you, how did you get from our depreciation schedule to your number?
It is actual annual depreciation expense, so it's
So
reflective
you're
of your system.
making an assumption without relating it to what it actually is. You're
No, it actually
simply
is
went by
that.
our schedule.
It's an annual depreciation expense reflective of your actual system. So it
So
actually
that,
is that.
that's, okay, I understand where you're going.
Discussion. Debt service coverage is something that actually comes from the outside community. So if we have debt service on our system, we have covenants that we must abide by in terms of those particular debt issuances. And in this particular case, our requirements, our covenants, state that we must maintain a 1.25 coverage ratio with including the system development charge revenue. If you do not include the system development charge revenue, you're able to go to 1.0. So those are those financial requirements, those covenants that were held by bond holders in terms of needing and necessary to be able to establish and meet those objectives. And so that, as we begin to create the rate setting process, we're not only looking at your cash flow needs, but also looking at the needs here in terms of your policy objectives.
Did you say you started in January
Of this year.
of this year?
And did you, when you spoke to us earlier, you talked about working from budget. Did you ever get the actual numbers?
We did, actually, and it was, so, and then I
When
would
did you
wait
get
and address
this?
that in the slide, or I would be happy to address that now. So we actually,
That's fine.
sure, that'd be great. So revenue requirement is again establishing your overall revenue needs. And actually this particular slide, so the perfect timing is where we'd actually address that. And so in terms of the key factors that we use to develop your cash flow needs, essentially what we're looking at is various different components. And so the first one we look at is your operating expenses. And what we have for your operating expenses are about $7.8 to $8.1 million. Now, as we stated before in the rate committee hearing, those were based on the 2012 budget with modifications. When we had the opportunity to go back and look at the 8 months worth of actuals that we actually had, in terms of where we think we're going to end the year, the good news is that we're about $60,000 to $75,000 within what the actuals are saying we're likely end the year at. So we're really confident that it is representative of the actuals. Okay, so that's the good news there. So our basis that we're starting from is good. And when we establish rates, the important part to understand about rates is that we're forward looking. So we want to know what are our financial obligations in the future and what are our needs and how do we begin to meet them in the future.
Angie, can I take you back for a sec? That second bullet, 2.3 to 3.0 million in capital every year. Are you talking about money that you believe we should be putting into the capital fund, or is that where we are at the present time?
That is based on a capital project plan, so what you will be needing to expend in the future.
Okay, so what you're aiming us toward here is not in any way where we are, but where you would like to see us be.
Right, where the plans of CRW are
Well,
planned.
CRW doesn't have a plan yet, so it's the plan that you are recommending, is that correct?
Based on your engineers from CRW, they have provided a plan that says here are the needs of the system for capital, and so that has been what has worked into this particular rate study. Does that answer
We
your
haven't
question?
seen that yet.
So again, you hit the second bullet there, it assumes 2.3 to 3.0 million in capital per year. We are looking at a number of different funding sources in order to meet that need, which is existing fund balances, system development transfers that we have available or remaining, system reinvestment funding, as we talked about, trying to get that portion of the monthly bill that is actually contributing to paying some of this on an annual basis. And then there's a consideration of new debt. Now, the reason why we're talking about new debt is that there is a certain level of capital, again, the 2.3 to 3.0 million per year that we anticipate in terms of this particular planning period. So what our recommendation is that should those particular levels be needed in those particular years, you continue on with this plan, it does not appear that your existing funding levels would be appropriate, so that therefore you would need some type of new debt issue.
When you say new debt, is that new debt that we're taking on or expenditures in the budget?
It would
like,
be
let's
new-
say capital improvement planning.
It would be new debt you would take on to continue at a 2.3 to 3.0 million capital plan per year.
Okay, so that has to do with our capital improvement.
Right.
plans. Okay.
Yes, not O&M, but the capital improvement. plan.
Okay, thank you.
And Angie, did you look back at our average capital expenditure? Going back because I'm not sure, and I don't have my monster spreadsheet in front of me, but with the exception potentially of the work that we did on the plant, we never get anywhere near that number. And so if you are anticipating, you're taking us out first, how many years?
Through 2017.
Okay, 2017, so you are assuming that we're gonna spend 2.3 to 3 million every year from now until 2017?
Sure. And if you do not extend that,
And
it's in your reserve.
Mr. George assured you that that's what we were going to do, or what he would like to do? Question?
I think it was capital improvement plan. I think those were
Well,
most
it
of the
can't,
projects.
it comes from engineering, our
Well,
engineering
no, the
manager
board has
said.
to approve those, so
No,
I
no.
think that's,
I think you might have missed what she said, Cammy. She said that that estimate was based on information that
I
she
heard
got
what
from
she said.
CRW.
I heard what she said, and what she
Okay.
receives from CRW, from our engineering department, are projects that the board has approved. One of them is the generator project, and that's going to cost a lot more than what we originally thought.
Okay, I am asking, I didn't ask you the question, I asked Mr. George, is it your estimate based on projects that we have in the pipeline that we're going to be spending 2.3 to 3 million a year? I mean, she said she got it from you, I'm just asking the question. Because that seems
The
way more than
number-
we've ever been able to bite off.
The number is based on our master plan that has $45 million worth of work forecasted to do. We took those numbers, took out the projects we've already accomplished, and used that as an average. Do I have particular projects that add all up to that? I have several that are $4 or $5 million projects, like a reservoir and some others, that need to be done. So if you wanted to use average, I'd say it's a touch high, but it's still 2, 3. 3 could be a little on the high side, but there will be years if we do not build up our revenues that we would have to bond, and that's where maybe one of the comments came from before. If we only have so much revenues saved to build a reservoir or major transmission main that, or plant improvement that may be coming, the money wouldn't be there. You would bond that going forward. But those are decisions to be made at a future date. It is a fact that we are getting behind very quickly. SDCs are down. If we try to stay reasonably at a rate that we had planned in the master plans, that we have the 98 and 2005 ones, these kind of dollars are needed to be there due to the projects. It is true we have not produced that. I won't go into all the reasons why here, but could that be expended? Yeah.
So basically, Mr. George, you took the master plan,
Yes.
you took the total gross projected numbers that you have in that, and divided it by the number of years between 2012 and 2017, and that's how you come up with 2.3 to 3 million?
2013 and 2017.
Generally, yes. It's a little bit more to it than that, but yes.
That's
Generally.
okay. We understand
Generally, yes.
perfectly that you're not a forensic auditor or a CPA. We understand that completely.
No, but I do know the master plan. I know
Yeah.
the work that's required.
Yeah.
So the numbers come from the master plan.
Yeah.
And that's what I plan around.
And-
So,
and
so
you-
this is reasonable.
And you know, Mr. George, you wouldn't have to be answering questions like this if we had taken and simply followed the board's advisory here. I mean, what we're supposed to have been doing. It says right here in section 1.3, sub C, number 5, the responsibility of the board is to conduct an annual review of rates and charges. Now granted, I've only been here since July, but if somewhere in the past, Mr. George, the board had been responsible and followed the procedure that they're here in black and white, we wouldn't be here at this position. We wouldn't be asking our ratepayers to swallow the whole rate.
Commissioner Sterling, we actually took a look at rates last year, and the rate increase was not implemented. So that's incorrect, what you're stating. We actually did take a look at rates.
For just 1 year out of that is.
Thank you, Mr. George.
So in terms of, what, in addition to what we consider as well as operating and capital, is also your existing debt service obligations. So we need to make sure that we are maintaining our principal and interest, are able to meet our principal and interest payments. And so they're at 645, you'll notice that's decreasing to 453,000, and that's due to the shape of your debt, so it's actually going down. New debt again there, that is subject to review at the time that it may be needed, which the likely timing in terms of our analysis looks like maybe in 2014 or 2016. It would add another 220 to 485,000 per year of debt service coverage. Again, that is something that the board will be taking action on during that time. This is strictly just a projection of what your needs would be.
I have a question for you. So if our annual debt is going down and our new debt is going up at about the same rate, it should kind of cancel out, correct?
Sure, if everything else remained the same. But it's everything else, I guess, is you have different capital needs and you have different financial obligations that are coming up. But yeah, you're making up some, which is good. So you're actually dropping $200,000 in that particular year. But by the time it drops to 453, you might be at the 485 of the new debt. So it's kind of like merging, but then it's kind of going up again.
And isn't it the case that right now, since I've been tracking our reserves and so on, and frankly, we're darn near rock bottom. And going out, if we do have to go out in this time period for new debt, whereas in 2009, when we refunded our debt, we were in much, much better condition. We were able to get an excellent rate. In today's market, it would seem to me that we'd be paying through the nose.
And that's why we'll be looking at the fiscal policies. We
Because
want
we-
to get you to a level where you're going to be getting as favorable a rate as possible. And so we really have to work up those reserves. We really have to be thinking about how do we become fiscally stronger in terms of our position and our picture that we would have to roll out to the bond community should we have to go out for new debt in 2014 and 16.
So if we don't significantly improve our ratio between revenue and expense, we're going to be SOL when we hit the bond market.
And that'll be something that a financial advisor actually would advise you on. So you will not have as favorable rates, absolutely.
But that's if we have a project that requires that type of spending.
Right.
And I don't foresee that.
And depending on what you're,
Mr. George just said that he's looking 2.3 to 3 million a year. So are we discrediting Mr. George and his projections?
No, it says 220 to 485.
You're talking about the debt costs, not the expenditure.
and so the last bullet there is your annual system development charge revenue. And I think that's why it's important to discuss there is that is a very volatile revenue source. As we've mentioned, we are considering about, $190, almost $200,000 of revenue coming in to help support some of those debt service costs. And if that doesn't happen, that just puts more financial pressure. So we just wanted to make sure that we were aware of that.
I'd like to make a comment on Commissioner Sterling's comments that we hadn't been increasing rates every year.
I didn't say that.
I thought
I
you
didn't
said,
say that.
I thought you said.
Look
that-
at the board policies right here, Ms. Amber.
That we had not reviewed it every year. That we had
States
not
right
reviewed
here.
them every year.
I've only been here since July, man.
All I'm trying to say is, I think you said that we have not reviewed it every year as it says we should.
I didn't say that.
That's what I heard,
He
sorry.
asked if we
And-
had.
Because this is a situation that all water districts in this area have been running into, is that they have been not increasing rates as time has gone on, not looking at their needs.
Ms. Kemper,
But-
you're
but-
not
excuse-
contending that we're supposed to
No,
take and follow other
excuse me,
people's
Mr.
examples?
Sterling.
We have a
Mr.
responsibility to our own.
Mr. Sterling, I believe I have the floor.
She does have the turn to speak.
Excuse me.
Wait, please.
Yeah. That water districts in general have not been doing as they should and increasing their rates to make up for costs as the years go by, because we've been trying to work with people with a slow economy. We've been using from reserves to do that. The water districts in general have been running into this and suddenly had to make some catch-up work, and that pretty much is what we're faced with right now. No, I'm finished,
When we put all of the costs together in terms of, how do we compare with the revenue levels that we have? So, what are our obligations? And so what you see here on the bar graphs is, you can see there's cash operating expenses with tan, existing debt service, orange, new debt service. You can see that's in the 2014 and 2016 when that need might occur. You can see that new cost increase there, and the rate funded system reinvestment, which is your capital obligation that's coming from rate funding. Basically, what we have here in 2012 to 2017 are the costs that we are projecting in terms of that particular time period. The solid black line is total revenues that you have, we projected coming in at existing rate levels. So assuming there is not a rate adjustment planned, how would you compare in terms of your financial obligations in any given year if we kept those particular levels? And you can see there, they're significantly low. They're really not even covering your cash operating expenses at this particular time, which is, fairly, I think it's an understood thing, if you are using your reserves. That's really all that it's basically saying, is you're depleting your reserves.
And how did you arrive at your projections of cash operating expenses?
And so we look at your customer statistics and then apply the actual rates that were charged, for north, south, and also residential and non-residential.
No, I'm not talking about revenue, expense.
You said revenue, don't you?
Expense.
How do we
Sorry, if I
project
said
our
revenue.
expenses?
Yeah, so you are projecting that we are going to continue to spend more money every year in operating expenses than we have been.
Sure.
And so where did you get that?
So we start with your kind of baseline year that we were talking about, so the fiscal year 2012 with modifications. And then we apply various escalation factors. So there are labor and benefit type of escalation factors, and particularly benefits are increasing significantly, and so we need to account for that in terms of the future. Materials and supplies may have more of a CPI type of escalator in terms of those particular year increases that we may be seeing should we need to purchase additional materials and supplies. And so there's various escalation factors that are applied.
So at that point, you were working from the 2012 budget.
Right,
Is
with
that correct?
modifications, and so we did compare that with the actuals for the 08, and we are very close, like within 1%.
I don't think so.
We actually are, we did check that, so I'm confident
I
that
mean,
we
how-
are, but that's something that we can talk about.
How could that be? Because we spent a couple $1 million on consultants in the last little while. That was not happening in 2008, I can guarantee you. We've had huge expenses for a massive new computer system. That was not going on at that point in time. And I'm not talking about capital expense, I'm just talking about operating expense. So I mean, I've been looking at these numbers, I cannot simply, cannot reconcile 2012 budget expenses as matching 2008. It's, in fact, Mr. Fuller gave us charts that clearly establish that that's not the case.
Well, and I think we need to clarify, because we're not comparing to 2008, we're looking at 2012 forward. So when we set rates, we're not looking to set rates retroactive in terms of actuals. We're identifying what is the need today and in the future, and identifying what rate levels may we need in order to capture that financial obligation. Is that
So
correct?
I misunderstood you then. I thought you said that our 2012 expenditure rate was within a very small percentage of 2008. Did I misunderstand?
Yeah,
that?
sorry about that. It's the 8-month actual period. So during the rate committee, there was a concern that we were not using actuals year-to-date that we had for fiscal year 2012. And so as of the end of February, we looked at actuals and then kind of annualized it until the end of the fiscal year to identify, okay, where do we think we're going to be in this particular, end of that time period? And so when we compared the actuals and annualized compared to what we're using in this rate study, we were within that, 1 to 1.5%.
Okay, so you're only talking about now,
Right.
basically, okay? Because I've looked at those numbers and just on revenue and operating expense, we're gonna be significantly in the hole. So, okay.
Okay. So again, basically what this is saying is existing rate levels are not sufficient to cover your operating, maintenance, capital, and debt service obligations.
I agree. You're absolutely correct.
So what does that mean? So in terms of, okay, great, the line's here, our expenses are here, what options do we have? We've come back with 2 alternatives that we shared again with the committee. The first one is the base case scenario, and the base case scenario is basically looking at establishing over the 6-year time period, so by the time we get to that 6th year, 2017, we are kind of maintaining our fiscal policy. So we're being able to capture our revenue needs in terms of operating, maintenance, capital, debt service that we showed in the graph. So we're now able to meet that requirement, but we're also able to start working on our financial policy. So we do have to go out to the debt market, we're gonna be in a good position. And so that's the base case scenario. The alternative scenario is essentially saying, is there anything we can do with that base case to help minimize impacts? And so the biggest thing was, could we smooth the initial annual rate impact down and see what we can do? In order to do that, we were, as we stated here, we would have to use and deplete the rate stabilization reserve. Okay, so that is an option in terms of that you have available to you, but it does deplete your rate stabilization reserve, and so that will no longer be available for future year use. Okay. Now, putting numbers to that, what does that mean? The base case scenario here, and you'll see at the bullets, and the table basically at the top is identifying what is the proposed annual increase that is needed in order to meet those financial obligations for this particular base case. You will see in the fiscal year 2013, 14, 15, 16, and 17, so it's kind of basically a projection out in the future. We would need in fiscal year 2013 a 28.5% increase in order to meet our obligations. That would be followed by a 12%, 7.25 at about the fiscal year 2015, 2016, and 2017. What we tried to do is show a sample residential bill, that bi-monthly bill there, to show the dollar impacts. A lot of times percentages are difficult to kind of deal with. On a monthly basis for a typical residential, what a 28.5% increase looks like is about $6. And that's a monthly. 3.25 was 12, and then again the 7.25s are about $2.20 to $2.50 on a monthly basis. So that's the impact.
Question here, you're showing the assumption in this scenario, 1.5 million from the rate stabilization fund. We have only allocated in this year, I'm working from memory, something like 657,000. And in the year before, we didn't allocate any at all. And so how do you expect us to get to 1.5 with unallocated funds? I think that's illegal.
I would never recommend anything illegal, so I just want to clarify that.
It's simply not allowed under the budget law.
The rate debt covenants allows us within 90 days at the end of the year to do a transfer in the next upcoming year to be utilized for that calculation.
I believe we did that this current
Yes.
fiscal year, did we not?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's only a paper, if you will, on paper, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. It cannot be an actual transfer.
No, it has to be an actual transfer.
You can't just put it on paper and not have that
Well, can he?
transfer.
Well, in that case, I invite you to read the Oregon Revenue Department's budget regulations, which do not allow.
No, it isn't it's not a budget issue, it's a debt covenant compliance issue. The transfer was done in this current fiscal year, but it allowed us to meet our debt covenants from last year.
Carol, I understand that.
We didn't do anything budget-wise that caused any issues or concerns or problems.
Well, but what I'm saying
It's
is
in spending the money.
if you transferred that much money that was unallocated,
It was allocated for this year, we transferred it this year.
Well, no, wait, let's sort this out. Last year, we
You know,
didn't meet the
this
covenants,
really
so you
isn't
had
the
to
time for
move
this,
forward.
for the
Okay.
conversation.
Well,
We
but
understand
what
that we
I'm-
have
okay.
needs with our debt covenants.
Well, so my question is, this year, we have allocated 600 odd. You're looking for 1.05 million. And Ms. Bright is telling us that we are going to borrow that from next year somehow, when we don't even have the money to meet our outgoing cash obligations this year. I'm getting a little confused.
So this is for representation only. As Ms. Bright presented, you're allowed 3 months of time in a future year for your debt coverage calculations to perform a transfer from your rate stabilization reserve to your general fund to count that money towards your debt coverage calculation. In our analysis, we are assuming that in your following year, within the first 90 days, you will make $1 million transfer to assist you in this current year's, fiscal year's debt service coverage calculation.
So then what you're saying is that in addition to whatever revenue we need to have to carry us through the coming year, we're going to have that plus X, whatever the amount is. So this rate increase not only has to, it's got to bail us out for this year, and then there's a huge hit because we haven't managed within our available funds this year, right?
So your annual financial obligations, yes, are requiring you to use some of that rate stabilization fund in order to meet the obligations.
Now,
So-
my question is that money that is spent?
It's gone.
It's gone.
That is
So-
no longer
Well, I know that it's already been
It's no longer
spent.
part of the rate stabilization ending fund balance.
Is that right, sir, Dan?
So the numbers that you're using up here are utilizing that rate stabilization funds with an increase.
We need to utilize it for this year, for fiscal 12, because fiscal 12, we have had the same rates that we've had since 2008.
No, we've spent more than we had, that's why.
We have the same rates that we've had since 2008.
That's true.
So,
But we haven't
so we
managed
would
with
need
that
to
money.
use rate stabilization reserves because we did not increase rates this year yet, if we're going to. And so we will need to use rate stabilization funds to meet the debt covenants.
You would have had to have a rate increase basically this year, or you wouldn't have that year. If you didn't have that available to you, you would have had to have very similar, 27% increase this year in order to meet your needs.
From the start of the year.
Right, you start of the year.
But Sergey, so after 90 days passes in the new year, that money is gone then, isn't it? to pay
So
bills?
to put a better picture on this, currently when we look at your analysis, we perform a overview of your, as MJ has mentioned, of your revenues and expenses. From what we saw, you have a significant deficiency between your expenses and revenues. Because you don't have enough time in the remainder of the fiscal year to adjust your rates accordingly,
Okay.
because there's only 4 months left, and if you were to do a significant adjustment, it would actually be higher. We're assuming, because we do have a rate stabilization reserve, which we're allowed to use to meet our obligations, we're using that money instead of to delay our increase to the following year. But we are using up those reserves to meet our coverage needs and our cash needs.
So 90 days after the beginning of the new year, that 1.5 million is gone. It's been
It will
paid
be-
out.
No, there's still 500,000 left.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
So- Well, I think, I expect, at any rate, that one of the reasons we got into this mess is because our beginning budget for fiscal 2012 assumed that we had about $2.5 million more than we actually had, as shown per the audit at the end of fiscal 11. So we're not only, I don't know what, borrowing from the future to pay for the past,
No.
but we started out with absolutely no idea of where we actually were financially.
Most of that is not correct, Commissioner Holloway. It just simply is not correct. It's right here in the blue book. It says every year that the board is obligated to take and look at the rates and the charges. It doesn't say wait until you've spent $1 million, and now you don't have any money. That's where the problem is.
Well,
Now, we
agree
have
with
to
that.
decide, do the ratepayers now have to pay for the sins of the previous boards by taking in what is still a recession and making them bite the bullet even more, rather than us cleaning our own house first? Let's get our own house stabilized first before we go out.
I think one important point to just mention also is that this is happening regionally as well. So we have had the economy, we have had very cool summers over the past 2 years, and so we have been dealing with a number of different externalities as well that are happening to a number of different utilities that are requiring them to go back and do rate adjustment, unfortunately, because we thought we would be at a better revenue level than we anticipated, because again, we have the economy happening to us, and we have people cutting back in terms of using less water, which means there's less revenue in the door for us. And so I think that that's important to also understand as well.
That's very predictable. You know, we've had that pattern for about at least 3 years now, going into 4.
I think the seasonal changes we weren't expecting to happen
Are you
these
kidding?
many years.
Remember my prediction of 650 down for last year? I was right on the nose, Tammy.
So in terms of the alternative that we provide to the base case, the big difference here, as you mentioned, is we're trying to minimize the initial increase in 2013. And so how might we be able to do that? And so instead of the 28.5 that we were looking at, it goes into about 20% in 2013. However, 2014, then kind of you still have to catch up to a certain specific level. And so it's 28.5 and 12, or it's 20, 20, and then you kind of get there. So you're still having to get to the same endpoint. It's just how do you get to that particular endpoint? Well, how we were able to minimize that initial adjustment is by using, again, the additional $519,000 of rate stabilization that we have available after that initial use in fiscal year 2012. And so again, what we're looking at in terms of impacts there are in the range of 2013 of $4 to a typical residential bill on a monthly basis, and then $5, and then it goes down to the $2.20 to $2.36. And so those are the two main alternatives in terms of the options that we can develop in order to be able to meet your financial obligations. Now the next step that we must go through is, now that we have identified the need, how does that then translate to ratepayers? And so essentially what that does, and again, what you'll see here in the next couple slides, you'll see one slide that shows base case, and you'll see at the top title, the next sheet is going to show the alternative. Okay, and so the base case is the 28.5, the alternative is 20% when you get to looking at that. What we have here is just, again, just the straight rates, and so we're going to show bill comparisons in the next couple of slides to typical usage levels. And so again, what we have here is in 2013, your existing is $11.70. That fixed charge on a bi-monthly basis would go up to $19. Okay. When you're looking at the residential bill, the charges that you have for the very different levels of usage, $1.60 goes to $1.85, and you kind of see the progression there. What we've tried to do is increase the fixed charge in these particular scenarios. We provided one alternative that increases the fixed charge. When we did a review of the fixed and variable charges, or excuse me, I should say costs on the system, you're about 63, increasing by the 2017 time period, about 70% fixed costs on the system, so they don't vary. And so what we're looking at in terms of how you actually collect revenue is more like 20% fixed charges. Okay, so we have very fixed in terms of our costs, but how we're actually collecting our revenue is more on the variable charge. And so 20% of our revenue that we have coming in the door is from these fixed charges, fixed meter charges that we have.
But a huge portion of our annual expense is personal services. And we certainly do have the ability to reduce staff and thereby lower those costs. So I have a little trouble with the idea that we have to maintain the levels that we have.
Sure.
Well, to a certain degree, but our union people, the people that actually, the people that actually turn the valves and do the work
Gotta
each
keep
day,
those.
their wages they're a little bit better than the overall view, but they're still, being paid a reasonable wage for the work that they do. They've been good about their union contract.
Can you go back to the previous slide? I have a question for you. The sample residential bill, that line, is that with the increase attached to it, or is that?
Right, so at a, I believe it's 800 cubic feet per bi-monthly period, if I'm correct, in terms of the
Correct.
sample bill.
No,
Yeah.
1600.
So like the
Okay.
$50.62, does that include the bi-monthly increase?
It assumes
Yes,
the
that's-
the percentage.
So it's not 50.62 plus 844?
No.
No,
It's, okay, you've already included.
Included
That's
with
the
the
total,
basic one,
right. The bottom two lines are just incremental additions
Okay,
to the previous year.
And over the 5 years, they're, by my calculation, 78.5 in rough numbers percent.
Now, how come,
Cumulative.
okay, thank you.
The other main thing that I wanted to point out in this particular slide, on slide 11, was for the non-residential volume rates. We have north and south, two different rate structures at this particular time. So we have block 1, 150% of your average winter water usage, and block 2, greater than 150%, and they're charged two different rates, and then the south has a flat rate. And so what we're recommending is to actually go into a consolidated, so you don't have north and south rates any longer in terms of the future, so you're actually combining them. So you'll have one non-residential class, not differentiated between north and south.
What's the percentage split between usage north and south at the non-residential alias commercial?
And so be able to look at that as we're
We
talking.
actually have, I believe we had 49 customers on the south side that are not residential customers, but a significant number of those are fire services, so that isn't impacted by the consumption dollars. And, 16. So there are 16 customers on the south side that would be impacted by this.
Well, the number of customers is irrelevant. It's their volume that is the only relevant number. Right?
Yes, that is.
I mean,
what
we
we
may have
did.
16
Yeah.
itty bitty customers in one place and 3 giant customers in another.
Well, all of the customers on the south side are relatively small. I think one, Country View Estates mobile home park is the largest.
So what I was asking Angie is, what is the percentage split in terms of consumption between those two?
Between north and south?
95.6% or so in the north, and about 4.4 in the south.
4.4%. So those 16 are small.
Yes.
Thank you.
In terms of the alternative, again, the fixed charges, this is quite a bit of numbers, and so really the meaningful is going to come in the bill comparisons. But again, we want to just give you an idea of what those rates will look like in terms of, fiscal year 2013 through 2017. And so again, here, the main difference between the one before and this one really starts in this first 2013. Meter charges are the same in both alternatives, but what's different is the volume charges. Okay, so because it's because we have a higher increase in 2013 on the first alternative, essentially the volume charges are lower, are higher in the base case. Okay, so let's say block 1 is $1.85 in that particular case. Here it's $1.67. So again, where it's just reflecting that 28.5 versus the 20% increase.
So, yeah, so because your percentage in the alternative is lower,
Right.
but then you catch up.
Correct.
At what point do you catch up?
I want to say it's like in the 2014 or 15 time period. In 15, I think close to 15. It's kind of the charges start merging. And I'm going to show you the bill comparisons again here, because I really think, across the board, equal increases to all rates. This is if we did not want to change anything in terms of our rate structure, so we're not putting any more weighting on the fixed charges versus the variable charges, and we didn't want to consolidate, and we strictly just wanted to take the overall rate increase of 20% and apply it equally to each rate component, or 28.5% equally to each rate component. This is strictly all that that's doing. Everything's the same, it's just bumped up by the overall percentage increase of that alternative.
Now, that is a new alternative, did you?
That was there before, yeah. That was there on the other, and presented to the rate committee as well.
You're taking what percentage of increase and dividing it by what?
The base case is 28.5, and so
Okay.
you take your existing rates and just increase everything by 28.5. Same thing, existing rates and increasing it by 20%, depending on which alternative you're looking at.
And the next years through to 17 would be?
Right, then it'd be, so it's 28.5, it'd be 12.7, I think it was, or 12.5, and then
Oh,
7.5, so
okay. Thank you.
it tracks that.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. Do we have 3 alternative rate structures before us?
Tonight, 2, I believe.
Two for each scenario.
Right, and unfortunately, you have two scenarios, and then you have two alternatives to.
One is using part of the reserve fund, and the other one is using all of it.
So we moved on to the rate design component. This section answers the question, okay, we established an overall pool of money that we need to collect from our rates. Now we're looking into how do we want to collect it. Since we have two options, the base case, which has a higher increase up front, under that option, we have two more options of how we're going to collect it. Do we want to incorporate more revenue stability and increase our fixed charges? Or do we want to keep the things as they are right now and just increase all components of the charge to the same amount? So just keeping our current rate just at a higher percentage, or do we want to actually modify the rate where a little bit more revenue comes from the fixed charges instead of the variable charges? And then we perform the same analysis on the alternative scenario where we spread the increase over the next 2 years instead of a higher increase up front, which we call the base case scenario, which is 28.5, and the alternative scenario of 20% in the first 2 years.
So I have a question for you. What's your prediction with, I think we've kind of leveled out with the variables with the weather changes and the conservation and the number of rate users. Do you think that's going to remain steady, or do you think it's going to continue to decrease?
We're always hopeful and optimistic that that we're at the bottom. You know, we hope we're at the bottom, but the trends, as we kind of plot out the trend lines, there still is room for people cutting back. I mean, there is still room for people to cut back, and so we always have to be cognizant of that. And so in this particular analysis, we're looking pretty flat. We haven't assumed any great growth because of the fact that if we assume it and it doesn't come in, that means we're going to have to come back and increase rates further.
Well, I'm just wondering compared to base and variable. So,
For the fixed and variable charge.
Exactly.
Really, we're looking at overall revenue level when we're looking at this. So overall growth rates is really what we're concerned about. Are we adding new customers so that they're actually going to be contributing more total revenue for the system? You know, in terms of the variable, as I mentioned, I think there's still going to be room for people coming back, especially in your block 4 and your block 3. That's more discretionary use, and so people can cut that back more. And so we have to just be cognizant of that. But I think we're using the 2011 statistics, which were on a lower year. And so I don't think we're being, overly optimistic in terms of, a revenue level that we may not be able to meet.
Thank you.
So now that I've got these spread out in front of me, so base case 1, which is spreading is you've loaded the base rate and minimize the impact on the consumption rate, is that correct?
Should we put more emphasis, yes, on the fixed charge?
But you've increased both of them.
Both alternatives?
No, take.
Oh, both, yes. Yeah, you
Two
have
base
to.
case alternatives.
You couldn't just do the one.
So you are, here's where I'm having a little trouble. I see 3/4 inch, 1170. Oh, this is existing, okay. So 1908 versus 1503 as a base rate for 3/4 inch meter. And then $1.85 in the first tier of the variable rate, consumption rate, as opposed to $2.06. Okay, it would be very helpful, much more helpful to have a side-by-side.
Sure.
Because it's pain in the neck to have to come back to Department later just to see the difference.
Right, we were requested to provide multi-years, and so multi-year side-by-side was a bit difficult, and so I do appreciate the feedback.
That's all right, I don't object to foldouts. I
Good
can print out all of
good
it by
to know.
17. Okay, I got it.
Okay. And so again, here is the alternative, which we talked about it, and again, this is the across the board, so that's just taking your existing rates and increasing all of those components 20% to get to what our overall rate objectives are. Now here's where I think is really much more telling, and I didn't bring my little different. The bill impacts. And so what we've tried to do here is show you for the residential class at 3 varying different usage levels. So at 800 cubic feet, a 1,600 cubic feet, and a 1,500 cubic feet bi-monthly, so this is for a bi-monthly 2-month period, what does your existing bill look like? And then based on the various alternatives that we have provided in the previous slides, what would that bill then change to? Okay, and so we try to do that in kind of graphic form so you can kind of see what the spread is as well down below in terms of kind of where you are today under an existing bill, and then what each of those rate alternatives would have that bill look like in the future period. Now, it's important to know that majority of your customers, so the average is at the 16 CCF, and so 16 and below, you're capturing about 66, 67% of your customers. Okay.
So say that again?
So at the 1,600 cubic feet, that kind of that middle graphic, and below, you're capturing about 66% of your customers.
So about 56% of our customers are in the 8 range?
No,
No,
16.
16.
Middle one,
Yeah,
So
the
that's
middle,
56, point
Mhm.
what?
56% of our customers.
66% of your customers.
66%.
Use 16 or less.
Less consumption,
Okay.
right?
And how about the 8 and how about the 50?
The 8 is about 42%,
Within
and below, yeah, 8 and below are kind of, with the 41% you're capturing, how many people? Once you're getting to, 50, we have 90% captured, so 50 and below, you're capturing 90% of your customers.
Okay, now is that 42 and 56% of our number of customers or?
The usage, right?
Consumption. So customers using at 1,600 cubic feet on a bi-monthly basis use about 66% of overall consumption.
So it's a consumption, not a customer number?
Correct.
Okay. So the number of customers then in that 42% is gonna be significantly higher than at the 56%, right?
There's a 41 and a 66%. What are you?
Well, did I mishear? Okay, in the middle group, 16, 56%, 5-6.
6.
6-6.
Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
6-6.
Oh, I thought you said
Use
56.
use
Okay.
16 or less. It's not the number that that's
Just
16, it's
16.
16 or less. So from 0 up to 16 is 66% of the consumption.
Well, how about from 0 to 8?
42%.
Okay, so the difference between.
Yeah, would be your.
Okay, all right, so, since that gives us, well, that isn't helpful. Because unless that means that 24% fall in that middle range, I mean, is that correct? 24%?
Fall in the 16 to 50 or the?
In the 16?
66 to 41 is
In
what you
between
shared.
9 and 16.
Sure.
Well, and it's kind of, these numbers are picking a specific
Number,
usage.
right.
So it doesn't, you can't very well show what's the bill impact gonna be if you use 9 to 49. It's gonna be a different number for everybody.
No,
So
no,
we're showing kind of a point in time, a specific consumption, just trying to address that more of our customers are gonna be impacted on the lower end.
Yeah, no, I understand that. What I'm trying to figure out, so I can think about this, is if 42% of our customers are using 8 or less on average, and 16% and 66% of our customers are using 16 or less, how many of those fall in the 9 to 16 range?
I mean, that's the 24%.
That's the 24%. Okay, that's the number I'm looking for, thank you.
Okay, but I think really the more important numbers are gonna be, what is the differential between these alternatives in terms of part of helping you out? What is the bill impact is what we're trying to kind of get at really with this particular graphic is what are you paying today versus what are these alternatives and what is that impact?
Well, the impact is on the people paying the bill. And if you take that 42% at 8 and less, that's, in terms of numbers of our customers, I think that's going to be a very large number. And that means, most likely, that we are hitting our lowest income customers.
We are the
I have to
first-
think about that as a commissioner.
The 41% definitely, that's going to be our lowest
And that
income
is
and the ones.
using 8 units of water, so in the bottom 2 tiers.
Yeah.
They don't get into the third tier or the fourth tier.
So they get hit hardest by a larger base rate.
Always, yeah, that's the issue.
I just need to understand these numbers.
Yeah, that's definitely the balancing act with everybody when they're trying to struggle with revenue stability versus, you know, who are we actually impacting, and so that's that very sensitive balancing point and decision that has to be made. What I kind of looked at here when I was looking at the comparisons as well is what's the spread, kind of the differential, and so if you looked at here, the spread is about $4.77 between the alternatives, and so the high one versus the low one, and that's by monthly, so on a monthly basis, the spread is, you know, $2.38. And so that's kind of what I try to look at here as well, is what is the spread between a potential high bill versus a potential low bill? Again, the middle one's gonna be about $3.75.
I understand 6-packs, quarts of milk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That, you don't have to go there. That's not relevant to this discussion. Well, it is in case you thought about mentioning. You know, I mean, if a Cadillac costs X and a Chevy costs something else, if you're buying a Chevy, it doesn't matter what the Cadillac costs.
Okay, so we'll move on. In terms of the non-residential, and again, here we've tried to put them together, we're looking at the north here. And again, it's really important to understand this is the non-residential, so this is the commercial type category that we have here. And again, same thing, because currently that customer class has a block 1 and a block 2, we wanted to provide a different comparison of if somebody just fell within that first block and never paid the block 2, and then somebody who actually had to pay water, or pay the block 2 higher rate. And so we wanted to make sure we captured that comparison. And so here, if you've just always stayed within that first initial block of that rate structure, then here's what the bill comparisons again would look like. And then if you, maybe in the summertime, use a little bit more, and so you got into that second block, then this is kind of where you're looking at in terms of the bill comparisons. And so again, you know, different spreads there, $21 to, you know, $44 potentially here. But again, these are commercial customers and general commercial establishments.
So you said that we have just a handful of we have a number of customers in the south. Not a large number here, but that large number, or the people in the north are paying much bigger bills. So if you take that, let's see, in your chart on the right-hand side, it's block 1 plus 25% of block 2.
Right, so again, the 25% of your usage falls in that higher rate.
Okay, so how does that relate to the 50, 75, and 200?
These are just the usage levels. So again, we just took some very different levels of usage.
So because your non-residential is currently tailored individually to each customer can potentially be using the same amount as a different customer, but not necessarily reach the second tier. So that's why it's a little more complicated to provide an apples and apples comparison for so many different variations of customers. So we established kind of 2 scenarios for you, each one having 3, a low, a medium, and high usage patterns. Your average non-residential consumption based on your statistics is about 75 units on a bi-monthly basis. So what we've done is assume, let's take a look at customers that you only fall into block 1, because based on your structure, a lot of your customers use only block 1 consumption. So under the left scenario, we only apply the block 1 rate. Under the right scenario, we assume that some customers do go into your consumption. Due to the nature of non-residential accounts, majority of them don't double their peaking capacity, therefore the amount that would fall into the block 2 category would probably not exceed 25%. So it's an assumption we made for comparative purposes. Based on that assumption, we provided the same usage patterns, only assuming they would reach the second tier.
Okay, I got it.
And so that same type of approach, and let me know if you can move on here, is the south. And so again, very similar approach, but here we're taking, because they currently have different rates today, we had to have a different bill comparison for them. Because right now they're playing a flat rate, and now we're proposing to go to a merged rate that has 2 block structures. And so again, you can kind of see the differentials there. Again, this is non-residential.
So this would convert everyone to a 2-tier.
In terms of some of the pros and cons for the base case and the alternative scenario, and so again, the base case is, you know, the first option that we looked at, the 28.5. Obviously, the pros there are greater revenue stability up front, so, we're kind of meeting our needs, we're biting the bullet and saying, here's what we need, we're gonna do that first year. Higher coverage, that's one thing that we all obviously look at because we want to make sure that you're maintaining higher, financial standards should you have to go out to the bond market or, being evaluated in that particular case. We wanna make sure that they're held at higher levels to meet covenants. Flexibility in future years, so if you did a 28.5% increase sooner, is the likelihood that, maybe in the last part of that particular financial plan, you would not have to do any rate increase, and so it kind of gives you flexibility on the back end as well. And then obviously maintain higher reserves is obviously going to be something in the base case. Cons, greater upfront rate impact, absolutely, we understand that is going to be, something that will have to be considered, is the impact to your customers, and so we're sensitive to that. In terms of the alternative scenario, and this is the 20, smoothing out that kind of front end. Levelized rate impact obviously is a pro, so you're trying to just kind of smooth that out there. Additional time for economic recovery, so do you want to take the risk as, the CRW, do you want to take the risk that things are going to improve and so you're going to implement a less of an increase than is needed, hoping that you will eventually recover. Okay. Cons, fully depletes the rate stabilization reserve and lower upfront coverage than the base charges, so we're not as strong in terms of debt service coverage, and then we also do have to deplete our rate stabilization. In terms of some comparisons, I always caution, as I did with the committee, in terms of comparisons, this is good information to have, but what we don't know is how various different entities operate, how they're taking care of their system, really what they're doing, and so this is good. Sure, information that we all like to have, but I do caution trying to compare apples to apples, because many times it is apples to oranges. Neighboring utilities, we have it on a small scale here in terms of, definitely neighboring. Here we are today at a 42.18. With the base case scenario, the 28.5 would be at 54.37. Okay. The one that is interesting in terms of we go into look at a greater scale, what's happening regionally, here we are again, 42.18, 54.37, so we kind of get in the middle of the pack there in terms of some of those regional comparisons.
I will comment at with some of the rate committee members, they were thinking that by utilizing the cities that maybe we were putting together that whole bill. This is just the water component of the various cities' bills.
I have a question for you though. With that base case, that's bi-monthly. Are the comparisons monthly amounts?
No, the comparisons are also bi-monthly. What we're trying to do with the comparisons is what is the current rate structure, for example, for Tigard. If they build on a bi-monthly basis, what would their base fee be? And then presuming that every customer up there is using 16 CCFs in 2 months. So it's all the same volume of water and just utilizing the various rate structures at those entities.
Thank you.
And Carol, is that only the residential rate?
That's all we're comparing is a residential rate, an individual single-family home, 16 CCFs, billed bi-monthly.
Do we have a comparison anywhere for non-residential?
Not this evening, no.
It's really hard to do that because there's not an average, there's not a really good average of the non-residential. It's such a varied consumption that,
Yes, but
I mean, we could pick a point in time. I actually did some analysis of Precision Cast Parts and of their total usage and the total amount that they pay versus if they were in some of these other districts. I did not do all of them.
that's not my question. If you, let's say, Tigard has a commercial rate, base rate tiers, I don't know what it is, but I don't know why you couldn't take the same utilization pattern
we
and
just did.
apply those rates, and that would tell us what a user there, a non-residential user would be paying, right? I mean, that seems pretty straightforward to me.
One of the main reasons, and again, as Angie cautioned, this is apples and oranges comparison as it is. The reason why we typically like to use a residential class is because residential class is very tight in terms of the different type of users. We have majority of the users use about the same amount of water as we saw, 16 CCF, and there's not very large confidence intervals in terms of deviation from average that we can go into. If we start comparing non-residential type of customers, we're looking at small mom and pop stores versus large grocery entities where an average customer
can be a gigantic user versus a small user. So it's difficult to show a comparison for each one different type of customer, whereas with a residential class, majority of the customers act very similarly. So it's a bigger representation of an average impact in the CRW versus.
Yeah, I understand the law of large numbers. But what I'm saying is, given an assumed level of utilization, since there seems to be so much emphasis on looking around regionally, I think it would be important for us to know how our non-residential rates stack against others. And if you pick, I don't know, we must know. We used to get just information about that.
In consideration of time, I can do some calculations
Okay,
and let
I'd like
you
to
know.
know that.
I would presume that the rate structures are all combined, what we get for commercial versus residential. And I would guess that we're gonna fall in a similar alignment for the commercial as we do with the residential, but I will find that out and have it available for the next meeting.
Okay, so this is only residential.
Right. Yeah, we need to keep going, so I'd like to hear from the public too.
Yes, and we're actually at that last slide, so.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of, the next steps, committee recommendation, I don't know how we wanted to kind of report on that, Cheryl, in terms of them speaking or else
I believe that I did send information to all the board members about the committee recommendation. For residential customers, ended up preferring the base case weighted to the fixed cost, mostly because they had concerns about the depletion of the rate stabilization fund. They also had concerns about doing a more in-depth rate analysis, a cost of service study to ensure that rather than just kind of looking at the revenue mix, that we looked at the total cost of the system and recommended that that take place either in year one or at the very latest year two of this scenario.
Carol, I didn't get that. Could you send somebody that copy? I haven't seen it.
So I think it came out later today, is that right?
I thought I
Whenever.
sent it to you,
We're
but
gonna have somebody print a copy for
I
us.
know we sent it to the, rate committee, but I don't know if maybe we did not send it to the board.
Are we able, Lee,
Okay.
is someone able to provide a copy?
Yeah, Karen will do it.
Oh,
Karen will do it.
thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I sent it to the rate committee to get their feedback, and I guess
Oh,
once
I
I got
thought-
the feedback, I didn't send it to the board. I thought I had, so I apologize for that. We also had, I believe you all have letters in front of you from the two commercial representatives from the rate committee, and they both had serious concerns about the revenue-centric perspective, I guess, of this without scrutinizing the expenditure side more closely.
I think that for the sake of the record, when we get your other memo here, we should read that in. We should read this one in as well, very brief.
I'd prefer to hear from the public that actually is
Well-
here to provide commentary,
Uh,
Commissioner.
It's-
We've received the letters, and then, yes, it's a courtesy.
It's also a way of keeping it out of the record.
I believe that one of the representatives is here, and they're able to read it.
It should be read into the record, but I believe there are other people here that may have signed up that were not part of the rate committee, so.
That's fine, I'll read it later.
Well, what can occur is after the meeting.
In fact, we're wasting
essentially
so much
is-
time, I can just read it.
Essentially, what can occur is after the meeting and everything, the hard numbers have done, one of us can simply volunteer and state that we are reading into the record the responses from our ratepayers. And that way, it'll be a permanent record for everyone to hear and not delay anybody from the highway congestion.
At this time, it's time for the board to have discussion as well. So if there's anyone on the board that would like to start,
I thought you wanted to hear from the
Would you like public comment first, maybe, and it could guide.
sure. Let's see, I have, oh, here, okay, I have, let's see, 3.
My notation's there, I can just read the letter into the record.
I'll wait
We
until
will-
the public has spoken. Please take a seat.
My name's David Blair. I'm a ratepayer, and if they're relevant, but it will be brought up that I'm Commissioner Holloway's husband. But I have been attending meetings longer than Commissioner Holloway has, and I have probably in the last 5 years attended more meetings than Commissioner Hardwell. Bottom line here is, let's keep it simple. The subject's going like this, going down for about 5 years
Addressing the
roughly.
board.
Excuse me?
You should be addressing the board.
She can't be presented. Who can? Well,
That's,
get that off the screen, okay. How do you know I'm not addressing the board? That's fine. Anyway, the subject's going down, expenses are going up. This has been going on for 4 or 5 years. They're projecting this expense to go on forever, at least 5%. Mr. Fuller would probably agree with this, that boards that look at that kind of data fire their CFO and their CEO, and they get those expenses under control. Now, Mr. Moore will tell you he's been saving you about $1 million a year out of the budget. Well, if he's been doing that, then that means your expenses aren't going like this, they're going like that. On the other hand, if that was real, you would be seeing that line of expenses coming down towards what the consumption is, which would be after about 4 or 5 years, CRW would be paying their customers to take water, if that were true. So that's fictitious. CRW operates off black box budgets. Big boxes, nothing. You can't see what's inside them. They just got big dollar signs and numbers on them. You never really know where this money is going. What it would appear is that CRW budgets about $1 million over what they really need every year, and then brags about how much they save. When Mr. Moore first got here, he did a study on salaries, and what he told me is that it showed that the organization was grossly overpaid. Since that time, salaries have continued to go up, and I believe Mr. Fuller of Precision Cast Parts gave a presentation on that. What you got is a case where there is spending that's out of control, you don't know what's going on. This board, or CRW, let's put it that way, spends a substantial amount of time blocking investigations and preventing public information from getting out, particularly on salaries. They want to charge board members $2,500 or something just to see the salaries, which is public information, by the way. And they can probably get it by punching a button on their $800,000 worth of new computer equipment. So this is just a situation that would leave the ratepayers with no option in the Oregon system except to sue CRW. And should you sue CRW, CRW is going to use your money to fight you. I don't think 28% is enough of a raise to handle what you can see when you look at this data. Nobody knows what it is. Until that spending is brought under control and you can see the financials on this organization, nobody's going to know what's happening. They refused to give the financials to Mr. Emmert and Mr. Fuller, and they wrote a letter saying they were pretty upset about this. There's a copy of it available, I believe it's outside. So. That really handles just about all of it. You've got an organization that's absolutely out of control, financially and otherwise. So, if you don't think they're spending a lot of interest
Mr. Blair, your time is
almost up. They spent $1.2 million on lawyers, primarily fighting releasing information and telling you how this organization runs.
Thank you. We have Warren Mitchell.
Just for record, I asked Karen Sipe to check on history about the base rate not to exceed 4%, 4.78. It was voted in by the public. She claims she couldn't find no record of it. But when I mentioned it, Barbara perked up and started going into pipes and all this reasoning and stuff, so she may know where it's at or when it was voted in, but there's somewhere in the law voted by the ratepayers that it's not to exceed a certain amount on the base rate. And I'm kind of glad to see that Precision Cast Parts and Terry Emmer are willing to stand up to the board of three and say no rate increases.
Thank you. I have Pat Russell, please.
Good evening, board members. I appreciate you all attending the hearing tonight. I know that you have, just as a precursor to my comment, I know that you have a tremendous challenge before you, and I put a lot of faith and trust in your knowledge of our district's operations. So my comments are based on my trust that you understand what's going on within the district. I'll find out more a little later this month as a budget committee member. But anyway, so my name is Pat Russell. I reside at 15989 Southeast Bilquist Court, just a block or two from Bilquist Elementary on the north side of the district. We've been in a new home to us for about a year now, so it's a little bit different for me to actually see what my rate is, and I'm afraid I'm jumping into that above this. I'm into the big top rate during the summer, like probably a lot of other people are. But I have six quick thoughts I want to pass your way. Number one, you know that over the last couple of years, sitting on the budget committee, I've been complaining about issues about conservation planning, salmon recovery of our urban streams and the Clackamas River. And this is very, very critical in terms of our quality of life in the Northwest. We all know that citizens around the country come to the Portland region because of that quality of life. Yet at the same time, we have some major industrial firms that are heavy users of water. I won't speak any names, but Washington County seems to have a pretty big lion's share of them. I don't know what our district has, but I would hope that our heavy water users are focused toward conservation. And that is one thing that I'll be looking at is how our industrial users can recycle the water that they are. And to be frank with you, I feel that our water rate payment requirements should be high to the point that it forces them into their recycling type programs. In other words, they're making sure that they're really absolutely using what they need, because after all, 2 minutes? Thank you. After all, the water is probably our most precious resource for us to live by. And I love the comment on one of the sheets here about water 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And I can say as one rate user that we've had 100% service this year. I've had no problem with my water, and I think that's excellent, and I think that's an extremely high priority as a ratepayer. Secondly, I did look at the conservation plan, and I found it very helpful in terms of background information, in terms of where we're at today, some of the trending that we're seeing, and what's going to look like in a few years from now. And it's very clear that our usage rate has probably peaked, and I think people, because of the economy over the last few years, is trying to cut back where they can. And just in my neighborhood, kind of north of the river, and it's mostly 10,000 square foot lots. I know that 5 years ago, most every yard tried to water its lawn in the summer and mow it weekly. I think we're seeing less of that. And that's why I think the consumption is going to go down. I don't think it's going to be flat. I think it actually will go down, because if we pay a higher rate, people are going to have to figure out how to do it. And that's okay with me, because that's conservation. And people, and this is where the district comes in to encourage a conversion of existing yards to a more efficient yard, so that those high summer draws can be reduced, because it's the summer draw which is impacting the Clackamas River fisheries. That's our biggest problem, and we haven't yet seen with Lake Oswego and Tiger trying to grab a big share. My theory on the capital planning and maintenance and operation, 1 minute, thanks, is pay as we go. I think most of the communities here in the north urban area, east of the river, Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge, Gladstone, don't know about Happy Valley, but most of the citizens here are pay-as-you-go type people. They don't want to be overly indebted. Number 4, I feel that we should go after the base rate alternative, and because there's not a lot of south non-residential usage apparently, I'm not too concerned about that differential, you know, as far as I'm concerned, but I think the base rate's the way to go. You know, we need to bite the bullet and keep it up. Number 6, my notes are cryptic here, I apologize. Actually, I know myself. Then I'd like to conclude that it would be helpful to have copies of the PowerPoint presentations, and I think for the ratepayers, it should be placed on the website. And these PowerPoints need some narrative, because I got lost on the differentiation between the north and the south. I thought, well, I thought we'd equalize the residential rates, which in fact we had, but it was the non-residential that apparently there's some equalization working on now. So thank you very much for your time, and I encourage you to move forward, don't delay. And I put my trust in you that you know what our budget is doing. Thank you.
Richard Kaufman?
Richard Kaufman, I live on 7402 Southeast King Road. I was a half hour late, sorry. And the questions I asked, I didn't hear the rule to begin with, so I wasn't going to ask questions about the slides, but maybe that's not what this is about. Is this more of an overall comment?
Maybe our consultants
For
can
the
answer.
Exactly. Any type of comments you have in regards to.
Oh, okay, the one I had on page 9, it talked about the 2012 included a $190,000 grant funding for carbon study. My question on that was what prompted this carbon study, and who's going to do the study? And I don't know if I can.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. I'll let you ask your other.
Okay, yeah, I'll get to that. I only have 3 questions. On the contingency on page 29, it talks about $848,983,000 to provide a source for emergency repair, anticipated capital and project cost overruns. Is there any surplus to that money? And if there is, if that money isn't totally spent for that, what is that? Does that money roll back in, or does that money go somewhere else?
I'm sorry,
I don't think it's on page 2.
I'm not sure.
I
what
got
you're
it,
looking
printout.
at.
I was sent
Yeah.
a printout I asked for, and I got sent to by
Did you have
email.
the date or the cover page?
I think this was from the meeting.
From
I'm
February?
the one that sent it. This is from the rate committee meeting.
From February?
I'm sorry, you probably don't have it. on
Yeah.
that.
So the contingency is money that's not spent. To be spent, the board has to authorize us to move that to a spendable category within our budget. So we just feel that it's prudent to have a sufficient amount of money. You live on King Road, there was a big water break on King Road a couple years back, so it's just a good idea to have some money in case things like that happen that exceed our budget appropriation. The carbon study is a study that's nearing completion, and it was a joint study with CRW and the U.S. Geological Service, and they were testing water for disinfectant byproducts. I'm not the scientist. And we did get some grant funding for that, but we did have, so we had some revenue and some expenditures, but we were responsible for a share of that. And those results should be on the USGS website coming up pretty soon.
And that expenditure will not continue. It will be completed at the end of the project.
So the money for the contingency operations, if it's not all spent, what is actually done?
It just stays there. That
It just
if we,
stays there.
if we never use it, we have that every year.
Okay. And my last one.
Hopefully not on King Road again anytime soon.
I was just curious on the capital improvement program, and I don't think you have that, the water treatment plant emergency power.
Mhm.
The budget 2011-2012 was $293,000. It's now going to go to $2,190,000.
This is a emergency generator that we are preparing to install at the water treatment plant, so if there's any significant power outages, we can still generate power to process water. So the project's being phased over 3 years, and so the first year is a lot of design work and getting prepared to do it, and then after that, we kind of get into the big dollars.
The important issue, Mr. Kaufman, it does seem like a large amount of money to pay for a Caterpillar generator, but the plant itself is having electrical updates that are extremely necessary in order for the plant to function in all 24/7 and to provide a safe working environment also for our staff that run the plant also too. It's just something that hasn't been done, and it's to a point now that it has to occur.
So that's a separate amount of money from the emergency power. It's 334. It looks like that was already spent.
That's in this current fiscal year, and so we are spending that money, and that will allow us to hook the generator up to the plant because we'll be at current standards for much of the other electrical stuff at the plant.
The reason I used to be a government contracts audit, and I used to audit the camp set up in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I used to audit the power generation system, so I saw that and I went,
Yeah.
that would be a red flag for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, it's a little expensive for one Caterpillar.
You should meet Mr. Fuller.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you.
And okay, so let's see, I have Gary Kerr.
I'm Gary Kerr, a ratepayer and a member of the rate committee. My concerns, as I mentioned in to the rate committee, have to do with the fact that it's vital, in my view, that we not deplete the reserve. That affects also the ability to bond cover and other things. And so, while I don't like the rates that they have to go to, that's my recommendation. And it's vital that we also do the cost of service study, both from a ratepayers information standpoint, particularly the commercial side, and that be done as soon as possible so that everybody can see where the costs have been and everybody understands what it takes to run a water district. And I also apologize, I need to leave. I have a grandson in the Court of Honor getting awards and I need to be there, so. That's why I'm
Mr. Kerr, isn't the scenario you have put forth is the one that's going to deplete the rate stabilization?
No, the base rate, the one that Ms. Brick talked about.
Oh,
does
base
not-
case,
Yes,
base case number one.
Number one that does not
Okay.
deplete, the one that does not deplete. Okay? Thank you.
So, let's see here. So, who else is on here? Cindy Rose Wolfram?
I would wait for the other people that want to speak, because I'm part of the
Dorley
rate.
and Dennis Carlson? Are they here? No. I think that's it. I would like to hear from some of, you can come up and speak. I don't have anyone else on my list, I don't think.
I'm Brian Johnson. I own Gladstone, and I'm probably one of your bigger users of Johnson City. So I've never been here to a board meeting, but I just wanted to let you know that your employees here, which is the guys out in the field and women in the office and all, are excellent people, always taking care of me very well. Okay, so I'm gonna say that, like the gentleman before, we have no idea behind these doors where your money is or how you're gonna pay for it. It's just basically up to you people to figure out, where, the money, you're gonna have to find it. It is a business ultimately. But basically, I would probably go with, you don't wanna take all your money, because if you have something big go down, you've gotta have a little money. And of course, Gladstone's the lowest, and I live in Gladstone. They got 10 miles of of transite pipe. You know what transite pipe is?
No,
Mike probably does.
Well, it's asbestos pipe.
oh,
And City of Gladstone would rather build a $15 million library than fix 10 miles of transite pipe. And it's not necessarily that you're getting asbestos out of it. It's basically, it's horrible pipe, it breaks, it's not good. So, you know, if you look at your thing to get you somewhere into the middle of the group, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean, it's just like my business. I mean, and ultimately what you pass on to me, I have to pass on to my renters in my place that are, you know. But it's kind of a two-way sword when you want to have conservation, because then that comes back and bites you in the rear end. You know, I mean, it's, you can't have it both ways. You can't be making a fortune and having people, and have things at your front counter to tell people not to water very much, put a little thing out there and a quarter of an inch is gonna last you all week, because it will come back and bite you.
Mr. Johnson, then your tenants are not metered individually?
No.
You have one valve that
One
comes in?
valve.
And what is the diameter?
6.
It's a 6-inch? And what is your estimated monthly cost to use for water there?
Well, when my bill comes, it's, you know, 9,000.
So if you took a 20% hit on that, there would be,
Yeah. But, you know, it's like the sewer district, you know, not to go past here. We were always on a sewer meter, so we got charged for being very usage smart. So that means we send TV cameras up the pipe to make sure the pipe's not leaking. It's just like you guys, if you're losing water out of your pipes, you're losing revenue. So for us to conserve and make sure our pipes are tight, we only had to pay what's going down the pipeline. But then the wisdom of the Clackamas County people now is, after all these years, you know, since the 70s, well, it's too hard for us to calculate how much we're going to charge people by billing them by how much you use. We want to just bill you $25 per household, because that's easier for us to keep books. So there again is like, we don't care anymore. If that pipe leaks and drains that lake, we don't care. There is no point. So it's kind of like with your business here, I mean, we don't know. You know, you have to make that decision. And of course, you're gonna have people coming after you, and I have no idea. I mean, all I do is know about this room by the newspaper, because I've never been in this room. I've always just dealt with the guys out in the field and the ladies up front that have been remarkable to me all these years.
have you discussed this issue with your tenants there at the park?
No. The sewer thing, what do you do? You know, you can go there and you can sit in front of the people, and what are you going to do? Because I could bring 1,000 people in, because we used to buy water from Clackamas. And Clackamas wanted to charge us a meter read for every house in there, even though there was no meter. So we told them where to go. And we went and bought that water tower from the Seventh-day Adventists, and we started making our own water. In retrospect, we could turn off your valve and go back to making water. Because we've only been buying water for
8-10 years?
Yeah. So we used to make water since '69, and we basically, under my idea, was just to get out of making water, because it's very complicated now with all the
requirements,
testing and all
state,
this.
federal.
Oh, yeah. And so we were the best way to go, but yeah, I'm just saying, I'm gonna say for my people, you know, to go on the record, is try to hit them softly, but I understand you have to run a business, because I have to run a business too. But ultimately, you have to know what happens behind those doors, where your money really goes to what, not just throwing it out on whatever.
Mr. Johnson, I wish we did.
Would you mind filling out a comment card too, just so we have that on record? That would
Like I
be
said,
great.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Um, It's good to have businesses too, as well as, or apartment and rentals, so that's, we haven't had that on the rate committee.
Yep.
Um, Connie, I know you were on the rate committee, are you interested in providing comments? While you're here.
No, not really. My name is Connie Brown, and I'm a ratepayer in what I have come to learn is the north part of the district. I walked in the door for my first rate committee meeting and found out how
so for fiscal year 2013, the $54.20, and you said that's like kind of like the average for residential, and that's a bi-monthly bill, so the monthly water bill's about, what would that be? That'd be like $27 with an increase of $6 per month.
I have a question relative, I had the same question Mike had, and what level of consumption is that based on?
The basis for the consumption, as we discussed during the rate committee, we assumed flat increases of consumption, so the same level of consumption as was in fiscal year 2012, we assumed it would be maintained.
2011. I think 2011
Okay.
is actually
Oh, yeah,
full year.
2011, correct.
Okay, so are you basing it on
16,
actual
yeah.
2011?
Consumption figures, yes.
Kenny?
Yes.
I'd like the rest of my question answered. So what was the first, the increase for the alternative in the first year?
We'll open this up, just that we have that. There's just too many things to have to, to bring. So we'll open up our computer and we'll be able to answer that for you.
So, Sergey, your projection is a decrease in water sales utilizing 2011?
No, we're maintaining our consumption levels at 2011 figures.
So it's essentially no growth.
No growth.
You have a flat.
The same level of consumption will happen, we're assuming the same level of consumption will happen the next year as it did in 2011.
Are you talking about dollars or
No,
water?
The consumption, but the dollars would go up because the rates are going up.
Assuming the rate increase gets adopted, the additional revenue will come strictly from the increase in rates, not an increase in consumption.
Starting in January of 2011 through, well, let's see, you're using the business year, so you're starting July 1st
Right.
of
Full
11.
year.
You started July 1st of 10
10
through 11. Okay, so what was the rate of decrease during that period of time, from the first month to the 12th month of the year?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, the water consumption did not increase, did it, during that period of time?
Well, it changes
starts
monthly,
this year.
but so you'd have to look at the total.
What was the decrease in the consumption over that year from the previous year?
From the previous year, I think we have in that graph.
I can look up that information.
It's double that.
So,
Okay, so the dollars from 2011 were 6,522,923, according to the audit. And although we had budgeted for that year 7,000,002.
That includes the wholesale, just as a clarification,
This is
wholesale?
all water residential.
Correct, we're only setting rates on the retail rates, just as a clarification.
So what is your number then?
5.9 rounded, 5.9 million is
Is
our
that in the
retail rate.
appendix?
Let me see. Let me check.
Yes, wholesale revenue is on page 26, I believe. In the appendix, there's a revenue requirement detail. It details revenues by rate revenues, retail under existing, SDC revenue, and then wholesale revenue.
Okay, so just to be sure we're all talking about the same thing. So on page 26, your 5,873,644 came from the audited residential rate revenue from 2011?
What we do in the typical rate study process when we have the information is we receive the detailed customer statistics, which include individual customers' bills from the historical year, the test year that we use. So what we do then is we apply your current rates to the bills and usages from those individual customers to see how we can reconcile the consumption. If the consumption is within, let's say, 3% of the actual reported revenues, we adjust the information accordingly, and we actually go by the consumption data for, in case we need to set rate designs based on consumption, not specifically on the reported just dollars. So
So
we
we look at customers,
we
detailed
look at
customer
detailed customer
statistics
statistics
and
to
price it out
correct.
to generate the appropriate amount of revenue from those various statistics in your system.
Okay, so what CCF were you using for residential to come up with your rates? I guess that's-
Residential,
I guess that's still the question.
1,082,000
CCF.
CCF. To answer your question regarding revenue after increase, what scenario would you like to see?
The alternative.
The alternative scenario?
First year.
The first year? The adjustment after applying the 20% increase would increase the overall annual revenue to $7,048,000.
So how much does that net us?
That would be,
And that's for the different scenario?
this is the alternative, correct?
And that's with taking everything out of the reserve?
Depleting the rate
Reserve.
stabilization.
Oh,
So
the
the
rate stabilization, we're
incremental
only
revenue
talking
would be
general fund.
$1,174,000.
What was it?
$1,174,000.
1,010,74?
1174.
But is it not true, Sergey, that as your figures show here on page 26, you say that the income for this year and the following years is going to remain the same?
That's assuming you do not, that's looking at rates at current levels. What we have to do is we have to assume starting from point A, which is fiscal year 2012, we're not gonna adjust rate revenue with anything except growth. Since in our assumptions based on looking historically, we assume growth will be flat. Our revenue, as you noted, stayed constant. Now, the next step is to look at our revenues and expenses and what kind of deficiencies we have ongoing, and then we apply an appropriate adjustment on an annual basis. So there's the revenue before increases at the top versus revenues after increases.
Yeah. But you didn't consider that we're daily spending more money than we're taking in. We spend more money than we take in on an annual basis.
That's what it's
We're
showing.
spending in deficit figures.
Correct, and the reason why you do show that you require a 28.5% increase is because you are spending more money than you're generating, and what that means to us is that you're using your reserves to cover your additional spending, therefore, you do show a need for an adjustment.
So
What it shows is that there's a need for the adjustment, but there needs to be looked inside CRW to see where the spending is going and stop the bleeding. Because you can't spend more money than you take in. Otherwise, all your rate stabilization money's gone. The checkbook says zero. You keep raising the rates 20%, 28%, 30%, it's not going to work. The customer will stop using the water, if not move out.
I would like to remind the board that there has been one rate increase in the last 10 years. So I would venture to say that most businesses have raised their costs more than that.
Carol, you're
That's
absolutely
irrelevant.
right. It goes right back to what I said. If the previous boards had done what the book said, we wouldn't be here. We'd be home.
So, and that's my concern, because I feel like we need to have an increase, like what the rate committee said, but for a shorter amount of time, so we can do that more thorough study. I don't feel comfortable not taking a look at everything, expenses, along with revenue that will be coming in. And the other thing I'm kind of inquiring about is, why is the base case one bringing in more net revenue than the alternative?
So that was
Because
the
you
first year
bump
only?
up higher faster.
No, I understand that, but I wonder what the reasoning behind it is.
So why would I do a 28.5 versus a 20? So if we were able to use reserves in order to do, so it's not like your
Well, I
costs
know
are
that, but
changing.
so the net isn't the same though, that's my question. How
Because-
come it's not the
Because
same?
we're only looking at 1 year. As you go through the 5-year period,
It all evens out.
it
Yes.
evens out by the end.
Yeah, you're almost ending up at the same spot.
Okay,
So-
but that's with the understanding that consumption's going to stay flat.
Correct.
And we're increasing our expenses, not just operating expenses, but capital improvement expenses in our master plan.
One of the things this analysis looks at is increasing money that goes into the capital reserve fund. We're currently, in the last couple of years, we've budgeted $500,000 a year. So this rate structure is building into moving that up in year 3 to $750,000, then up to $1 million, $1,250,000, and $1.5 million going to capital reserve by the end of this structure. There's also building in, trying to keep a larger ending fund balance in the general fund. So there's some of those good financial policies that we have not been able to maintain because the revenues have not kept up with our expenditures. But this builds in not just let's keep everything the same. It builds in let's improve our money put aside for capital improvements as we go along through this process.
And I understand that, but I still think we do need to do a better job on the expenditure level.
And
I think it's a valid point.
yeah, as I presented earlier, the budget that my staff is putting together now, and we've been working with all of the managers, is going to be an absolute, as close as we can get it to a flat budget. Bearing in mind that we do have items coming up in the next year that are mandated items. We have to spend money on that corrosion testing for the south side to be able to utilize the well. We have contractual increases for the represented staff that's in the union contract that has been approved by the board. And I had a third one that I can't remember right now. But, we do have certain mandates that we have to do whether or not we raise the rates. And so to be able to keep a budget completely flat is really challenging. And part of doing that is putting off some of our ordinary maintenance until a later time period.
Commissioner Holloway and Commissioner Sterling.
Was Mike, were you finished?
I didn't start yet, did I?
Oh, I thought, okay, you got your question answered.
No, I have more questions. Go ahead,
I understand the, if you will, the citizen members of the rate committee perspective, which I share, is that it makes no sense to drain our reserves so that we have nothing left. The bottom line is, at this point in time, with either scenario, we're going to have, so far as rate stabilization fund goes, we're going to have $500 million or effectively nothing. My concern, which I believe was expressed by Precision Cast Parts and Emerald International, is that they didn't have, and the rate committee didn't have, any information about where the operating expenses went over this past few years. And so my deep concern is that we're working, as I told you when we saw you last, that we're working from a flawed-based premise, because a lot of the numbers that are in there are huge and they're extraordinary. This huge expenditure on computers and software, for example, we're not going to complete, and I have gone through all of our accounts payable, I've gone through all of our budgets, and I've gone through all of our audits for a multiple year time period. And I've cross-footed everything, so I'm very confident of my numbers. And so I'm working only from CRW data. And we have had these huge expenditures, particularly in materials and services, that certainly should not be recurring. And we have...
like which ones?
Well, our consulting fees, computer costs, the office remodel. Very little of that was capital, most of that was
The office
M&S.
remodel was capital outlay.
Well, some of it was, but a lot of it, I've looked at all those numbers, ad nauseum, unfortunately. And only because I could put them together myself manually, not because I could get them from our management team. And so I am deeply concerned. I think their philosophy is fine. The RIC committee's philosophy in that respect is fine, but I don't think the numbers I don't think we're working off of numbers that support this level of increase. I think that, and I'm sure that that's what Precision Task Force and Emmerich hung up on, because, I mean, I know much more about those numbers than they do. They only have what they were able to get from the accounting department. And I know that we've had these huge amounts of money going out. We have roughly $150,000, most of which is going for writing an operations manual. I don't think we're going to continue that level. So we are putting out multiple thousands of dollars last year, this year, the year before, the 2 years before that. So those are monies that should not be being spent again. And so I think if we can get to real numbers and we can get to a realistic budget that cuts that stuff out, then we'll be in a position to know how much money we need. But until that time, we're gonna whack people only to, to support a champagne budget that nobody should be affording.
Thank you. Commissioner Sterling?
Let's stay, Sergey, on page 26, if you would, please. I'm not a rocket scientist or a CPA or anything like that, but we're projecting that the revenue for this current year we're operating in, right, is $5,873,644. Okay?
That's right.
Right? So, Ms. Bright, at what percentage are we currently at in spending? You know how you break things down at a percentage? And can we agree that we have 3 months left to the end of the year?
Right.
April, May, and June?
Right.
We
Okay.
have one big billing period and one little bitty billing period.
So typically every month when I come before the board, I give you the financial statements, and we should be through the end of February at about 2/3 of the way through the budget. And our expenditure level at that time was right around, I believe, 50%. I don't have the numbers right here in front of me. I don't memorize every number I look at, but
Right.
we were below where we should be budget-wise for the year, but our revenues are also below what we budgeted, so.
And weren't we going to be somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 below this projected figure? Or a little bit more, I think?
For the revenues?
Yeah.
I think.
I wanted to
at
say it was
my
close
last
to $1 million.
analysis, No, it was not nearly that much. We were, my revenue analysis, I believe, we were at around the 250,000 level below the budget. And these numbers, again, are calculated based on consumption, and when we book the revenues, we have a few adjustments in there. And when I'm calculating water sales, I'm including wholesale. This number doesn't include wholesale. So if you add the wholesale, that's another 554, and that's closer to what we budgeted and where we expect to end.
So we'll be short about $500,000 or $600,000.
I don't believe we will be that short, but we will be short.
Yeah. So Sergey, that kind of alters your figures then, doesn't it?
No, I'm still not I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Well, this figure that you're using, the $5,873,000, it's
So-
actually not going to be that. It's going to be less than that.
Just as a clarifying point, the documents that were received in the beginning of the study process used the budget that was developed the year before. We looked at your customer statistics versus the budget used, and based on the weather patterns, we went with the customer statistics, which were different from the budget. So we're actually using our own calculated revenue projection, not a budget estimate number. And in terms of total revenue, the total revenue that are applicable towards your expenses are actually the total revenue line item under the 7.1 million. the $5.8 million is the only revenue that we can augment through rate changes. Retail rates.
And you're confined within the realm of your workday and the manner in which you do it, but the issue still remains is water sales are down. And they're continuing to
And
drop.
to answer your
Believe
previous.
it's a base that was down.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're using the base that was, if we're looking at your historical information, that is looking like one of the lowest years in the last four. So it is also a choice. We could assume a negative growth rate, but with our, based on the discussions that we had, we
You just
assumed
had to give it the best
flat.
shot. You know, that's all that you can do.
Correct.
Okay, so,
Hold on, Mike has a question.
Well, I have a question and a comment. I have to leave. So I want to know what your plan is for continuing this. I mean, the rate hearing's over with, but.
Well, the rate hearing's going to most likely end tonight, and then the board will, if they decide to take some action, will happen at a later meeting. So
we don't have a date for that later meeting yet?
our
The 20
meeting was canceled, other than.
Yeah, the
rate
regular
hearing.
one, 'cause this is gonna take.
Tammy
too long.
canceled it.
Next Thursday, are you available next Thursday?
Don't know yet. I'll
At this
check my
point, why don't we
calendar
just
when I
put it
get
into April?
That's, no, you can do that. Is that,
The issue, depending upon what the board wants to do, is if a determination is not made until the April board meeting, the rates cannot be effective until July 1st.
And then we're really
If
in
a
the tank.
determination
Totally in the
can be
tank.
made before the April 12th board meeting, any increase could be effective with the June 30th bills.
So what's a drop dead date for you, Carol, for being able to have a decision?
a week before. Well, next.
So a week
Well, the
before.
29th next week, Thursday, I believe, next week Thursday.
About April 5th is probably.
I'm fine with next Thursday or any.
Next
any day,
Thursday?
Except for Monday.
Next week Thursday,
Okay,
next week Thursday.
Thursday at 6.
And then a
That's it.
hypothetical question, if, probably for Carol or whoever, if you said the revenue on the base case scenario was 1.6 the first year. So hypothetically, if we were to cut that in half and say it was 14.25, then the staff, in order to be as solvent as that would make us, would have to cut 800,000 out of the budget, right?
And I seriously want to know what can happen to make, cut those expenses before the end of the fiscal year, what we can do.
So again, hypothetically, if we were to say 14% for the first 2 years, and then within that resolution, or whatever you want to call it, if we say in the spring of 2013, you're mandated to do a full-blown study, and then the rates will be adjusted after that accordingly by whoever's in place at that time.
This is a question, Mike?
No, it was a hypothetical.
No, I mean, but if the board ends up doing something different than we have presented to the public, we're gonna have another rate hearing, right?
No, the rate
No.
hearing's closed, so the public has a chance to hear about it, provide commentary, you close it, and then the board takes action during a meeting.
But the
The
budget,
board frequently does different things than.
These are just suggestions. We can do whatever the board decides to do.
And yours was, Mr. Cardwell,
I don't think so.
14%?
Well, I was just saying cut the 28.5 in half, and then 14.25.
And during that year, then, Mr. Cardwell will have an appropriate rate study?
Well, my hypothetical was
I'd like
14.
to have one.
My hypothetical was 14.25 for the
trying to
first
get
2
one since
years.
2007.
Now and the next one, like you've got 2 years up there, and then within the first year of that, you'd have to do a study involved in a full-blown study.
And I think we would have concerns of being able to meet the debt covenants because we would run out of rate stabilization. before
Well, it would
we got
require,
It's gonna
along with that, staff to
require-
cut 800,000 out of the budget.
Exactly, it's gonna
That
require
would- that
cutting
would be a-
expenditures.
That would be a requirement.
there. And at least 80% of our budget is, of our materials and services budget is mandated costs. Costs that we incur to meet testing requirements, water quality issues, watershed management, as well as, contractual purchases of water. So
Carol, materials and services is where all those consultants are.
there's not that much dollars, there's not $800,000 worth of consultants in materials and services.
Do you feel more comfortable if we have somebody else come in and look at these numbers And that way then you're not responsible for the
We do have other
800,000?
people come in and look at numbers, and those are the auditors. I can come up with some plans, but I will
I
tell
think
you,
that's- yeah,
800,000
that's-
is gonna be.
But speak up, if you
extremely
feel
challenging.
uncomfortable about doing it, we'll get someone else to come in and do the dirty work for you. That way then you're Pontius Pilate.
No, let's not be offensive.
I'm not trying
but
to be
if we-
amicable.
No. So,
Very defensive act.
let's, you know,
Carol.
Carol still deserves some respect. So
I
what,
don't hold her responsible.
so that's why we shouldn't be attacking her.
I'm not
So
attacking her, I'm
what,
just
I guess
correcting.
if we could get some scenarios along, because I know that this discussion is going to lead into the budget.
Well, and
It's-
that's, I guess, one of my concerns is this is not a budget discussion, and we are working very hard to get a budget together for the budget committee in April.
This is gonna determine your budget though.
Yeah, but we
And
need.
we are
but
balancing
we
the budget
need
based
to
on no rate increase
take a
until we
look
have direction.
At that revenue and expenditures. We need to base our decision on revenue and expenditures, which is gonna include, which is the budget. And you know,
We can't do it
that
otherwise.
includes the capital improvement projects, like the big projects, even the generator project, even the Carver Bridge project.
And
things-
I
Yeah,
will,
but that's not where these costs are falling out.
capital
That's not where it is.
reducing capital expenditures
General
would
fund.
cause our general fund budget to increase.
Exactly, that's my point.
It's general
That if-
fund that's in trouble.
That, no, she just said it would cause our general fund revenue to increase.
Or expenditures to increase. The general fund expenditures would increase with any reduction in CIP projects.
Yeah, but it would help us for the next budget process. If we can see.
How can that work out? I mean,
If we can,
Because when our
because you have to
employees-
set up funds, so, but if we can reduce one fund to increase our general fund,
Okay, if we reduce CIP projects, if we limit the amount that we spend on CIP projects, our general fund budget will increase.
Yeah, because
Not our
you'll-
revenues, our expenditures.
Because you'll
we
move
have-
personnel costs.
We have employees
Very
that work
simple.
on these capital projects, and their salaries get charged to the capital project.
But that's a drop in the bucket.
It's fairly significant.
Well,
but I think that's what we kind of have to take a look at. That's my feeling, I don't know, is that,
excuse me, Kenny, last year it was $251,212, and we're not through the year yet. And so compared to, hang on, compared to, oh heck, this doesn't
Well,
work
but
out.
you're finding
Anyway,
that-
it's
we're
a-
not
it's a
talking
drop in the
about
bucket.
cutting the boys' wages on their contract or anything like that. The guys that turn the valves and contact our people,
Okay, but
we're not talking about
You
that.
cannot cut their contracts, but you can cut them.
I have a technical question I need to get answered.
We already cut that. Graveyard, swing shed, you already did.
No, you don't know that, Mr. Sherwood.
You told us that the last
That's what
time
you
we
said.
met.
Back to my original, Cammy, when's the next meeting?
it'll be the 29th,
29th,
the
that's
20th,
it.
next week Thursday.
I have-
Okay, now my technical question is,
Thank you.
when this, on page 26, this 5 million number, is that residential only?
It's total retail rate revenue, which includes all your non-residential classes, your fire
And commercial.
revenue, and residential.
So it includes all revenue, all operating revenue,
Retail
All
revenue.
retail revenue.
retail?
Not
Not
including
wholesale.
wholesale.
So I'm,
So, wait just a second, I need this answer. It's retail and commercial and
Commercial
not
is retail.
wholesale?
It's not wholesale.
Retail, so by definition, what we use, I apologize for not defining it earlier. Retail revenue we define as your rate schedule for your
Monthly rates.
monthly rates, which include the bi-monthly fixed charge
Residential.
for the
Yeah, I-
residential customers, the non-residential customers, and then the fire charge. Those three main classes comprise the retail revenue.
Okay, so it's fire,
Residential
residential,
and non-residential.
Non-residential.
Commercial.
which is commercial, okay.
And multifamily and whatever, and you have
Okay.
subclasses
Okay.
of that.
So you are showing, and everything except wholesale, 5.8. And in fiscal 11, we had a total of 6.5 if we assume that Sunrise is pretty level, our wholesale customer. That's, in round numbers, $500,000. So you're going off of that 6.5. So you are estimating less revenue, operating revenue coming in than we had last year, right?
So by our numbers, if you combine on your summary sheet, the 5,873,000 line item with a wholesale revenue line item, you will get 6,435,481. Based on the statistics we received, that's revenue we calculated, and based on the degree of difference that we accounted for, it was very close to the results, compounded with the potential conservation that can happen. We felt that the revenue was represented.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just needed to understand exactly what was in that number.
The important thing is, though, for you, Sergey, because you need to take and present credible information to the ratepayers and to the board. If perhaps between now and next meeting, you could stop by and Carol would actually give you the real water sales numbers so that you can take and see where.
Okay, I'm sorry. They had actual consumption numbers for our customers for the last 2 or 3 years. Specific consumption numbers, and they did a calculation based on our rates. Those are as real as the numbers are going to get.
And it's almost a year ago. You
And
don't,
it's very
you said
similar to
you don't
this
have
year.
the current year numbers,
So,
right?
okay, so,
It's
It is
very
gonna be
similar to
similar.
this year.
It's the
okay,
expenditures
so
that
we
are the
need to
problem.
kind of wrap it up.
Yeah.
I guess for our next meeting and maybe, well, before it, what I'm seeing is because of our revenue situation, places to cut, materials and services, what we can possibly cut there. I know, and that's the one that's gonna be our most fixed expense. And it's gonna go up, based on, no, I'm not at that. Based on water treatment. And then we have capital outlay, which is a necessary expense, maintaining our system. Areas to cut is going to be part of material services, personnel, and certain capital projects that we may have to table. Generator project being one of them. I mean, I don't know why we're not getting FEMA money for that, or coordinating, that's not your issue, coordinating with other water districts. If we're the only one with a generator in this region, I believe Gladstone has one.
We're the only one without.
Or one without. If we even need one, you know, seeing if we can have water service through Pipeline B in an emergency situation, or something like that.
But if we don't have the generator to get it up, we can't get it. in
No, if someone else
emergency.
has a generator.
That's a good suggestion, Pipeline B. We'll use
But no,
Pipeline B
but-
to feed our south customers. That'll save us $250,000 right there a year.
Or like the Kerber Bridge, things like that are, in my opinion, in this study, if it's in the master plan, and some of the other projects Bob was taking a look at. And I think that may affect the percentage of a possible rate increase.
Well, the way you would have to look at it is that we have ongoing operations and services. That includes all the maintenance, et cetera. Then we have CIP, which picks up a little bit of personnel cost and some materials and service, and some capital outlay. But basically what they're focusing on is getting us out of this hole that we're gonna be in by the end of this year. We're already probably in it. And then also trying to pull together enough money to start rebuilding some of those funds. And I would think that what we need to do as a board right now is take a really hard look at what we can do to cut expenses between now and the end of the year, so we don't go negative and hopefully don't go into default. And then get the rate study going ASAP you know, it's gonna be, has to be combined with the budget process, and lay out a budget next year that is reasonable, and from that point, we can then go forward and develop a reasonable rate structure.
And I definitely agree.
Yeah, I think that's what we have to do.
So for the next meeting, which we'll make a decision next Thursday, I think we definitely need those scenarios on expenditure cuts.
Yeah. I agree.
If at all possible, perhaps you'd submit them prior to the meeting, so you can get some feedback
It's
back?
difficult.
I will
So you don't have to
try do
assume
that,
full
but this is
responsibility
a
yourself?
Pretty significant
Just
volume
turn
of
it
work.
into a rebudgeting meeting, I mean, that's what you're asking to do, and it's also,
Prior to the budget.
you're making assumptions that every number that you heard tonight is a correct one. So if you wanna see what $800,000 looks like out of the budget, that doesn't take any intelligence, I can make that happen.
Yeah, but I think we definitely need
You
that,
save that much every year.
that type of conversation. I don't think it's something that we can ignore. I mean, from feedback I'm getting from the public, I think it's something that we just can't shove under the
I
rug.
would like to say that the rate notices that went out to our 12,000 plus customers, I did get 7 emails from customers in the
Yeah,
county.
yeah.
7.
Thank you. Just
I
7?
did have 2 phone calls, and we actually had one woman call and asked Terry if she was in our district, and Terry said, well, what's your address? And she said, gave her the address, and Terry says, well, no, you're not in our district. And she goes, darn, she goes, because you guys have like the cheapest water. So.
But I think we still need to at least address it. I think we, whether we accept it or not, I think we have to still address it. I do. I think that it's something we still need to take a look at, and we just can't disregard it. And I know you guys do great work, and you work hard, and it's gonna put more work on you, and I know this is a stressful time for you, Carol, because of the budget as well. But it's, you know, and I commend you for I guess, getting kind of being the whipping post at this meeting. So I apologize for that.
Well, if I might just add one more thing, when you talk about a flat budget for next year, that is of grave concern, because we are spending so much money now. If we expect to stay at that level, I mean, you know, we shouldn't. And I have all the numbers. And they'll match Carol's numbers, because that's where they came from.
But I think that we still need to see that, because if it's
What?
bare bones, we need to know. We need to see how we would be affected if we did make those kinds of cuts.
I'll show you.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to close the rate hearing. Oh,
Well, that's fine.
Oh,
That was a sigh of relief.